Hi guys, how are you all today morning? Good morning. Today is 25th March 2023. My name is TSV Raghavan and I live in Chennai, Tamil Nadu, India. This is my spiritual vlog on YouTube. Haribol TRSV Nectar NECTAR Nectar. In this particular vlog, in all my previous videos, we have been discussing about the knowledge and information that we have gleaned through the study of spiritual books, scriptures, contemplation on the material universe, and meditation on the spiritual universe. This particular video in this vlog is no exception to that rule. In fact, it is a mere continuation of what we have been doing in all my previous videos. So let us continue with this vlog. But before that, I would like you to subscribe to this vlog and this video so that I may keep reminding you of my other videos. So now let us continue with the discussion for this video in this vlog. We have been actually trying to analyze the human psyche and how it is formed in a living human entity during a particular lifetime. Before proceeding further, let me remind you that the psyche of a human living entity changes with every birth. Yes, it may be influenced by the psyche in his or her past birth or births, but it is not necessary that the same psyche of a living entity which was there in his or her past births will remain the same in the future births. As for example, Gautam Buddha, the person who started the religion of Buddhism, has gone on record recognizing or remembering many of his past births, which included that of a banyan tree, an anaconda, an animal, a beast, a common man, a dog eater, a Shudra, a Vaishya, a Kshatriya, etc., before becoming evolved as Lord Buddha. Even Lord Buddha in this particular birth was initially a prince of a well known kingdom in Nepal before he became a monk, and that too after his first 16 years of life. Change is the only permanent thing in this material world. The human psyche of a human living entity is no exception to this rule. In fact, the psyche of a human living entity keeps changing even in one lifetime thanks to the experiences, the atmosphere, the company, the evolvement, etc. of that particular human living entity. This we must remember before we start with the case history for today, in which we will delve on the subject of psyche of a human living entity and how it is shaped up through various factors. We all know that there are four major factors which help shape up the psyche of a human living entity. These are: first is called prarabdha karma. What is prarabdha karma? Prarabdha karma is a slice of sanchit karma of a human living entity who comes with this prarabdha karma in a lifetime to work out that karma during this lifetime. This slice has been taken from sanchit karma, which is actually the storage of unworked past karma of the same living entity, which is stored in his or her unconscious memory in the subtle body of that living entity. These living entities take several births in this material world, and they die in several births during a lifetime in this material world. That is, one living entity has several births and deaths during his or her endless cycle of births and deaths in a material world during that person's evolvement from materialism to pure spiritualism. In that process, the same living entity does several karma during those past births. Of that karma, some remain unworked during that cycle of endless births and deaths. The unworked karma is stored in what is known as sanchit karma. This storage is kept in the unconscious memory of the subtle body of the same human living entity, whether it is a male or a female. From this storage, one slice of karma is taken by that living entity to be worked out in a particular lifetime. Based on that slice, this living entity takes a birth in a lifetime. This slice is known as prarabdha karma. Prarabdha karma is the first layer or first factor which influences the psyche of that particular human living entity. Second is known as Kriyaman karma. Destiny and God has bestowed a thing called free will on every human living entity. This free will can be exercised by the same human living entity during a lifetime. Besides working out his or her prarabdha karma, this very human living entity gathered by that living entity during a lifetime. This karma, which is new and which is a karma done because of efforts of that living entity, is known as Kriyamana karma. Kriyamana karma becomes the second factor that influences the psyche of a human living entity. The third factor is as follows. Besides this gross body, every human living entity has three subtle bodies. They are the causal body of intelligence and logic, the astral body of feelings and emotions, and the etheric body of five senses, that is, sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. Vibrations emanate from all these subtle bodies individually. That is, whether it is causal body, astral body, or etheric senses body, each transmits some vibration based on its own nature. These messages are transmitted to a mass of tissue called the brain in the gross body of every human living entity. Based on the background, the prarabdha karma, the kriyamana karma, destiny, taste, preferences, whims, and fantasies plus other factors, this very brain takes the vibrations of these three subtle bodies and begins processing them. It also includes the evolvement of that human living entity on the material or the spiritual world. Based on these, the brain or the mass of tissue chooses some of the vibrations from the three subtle bodies and begins masticating, chewing, and processing those vibrations. Once it is complete, the same brain transmits or percolates the juice that has been extracted out of this particular mastication into the gross body of the same human living entity. This human living entity reacts with his or her gross body according to this transmission of vibration from the brain. This process begins at the birth of a human living entity and ends at the death of the same human living entity in every lifetime. Because of this, the prarabdha karma and the kriyamana karma are worked out in every human living entity in some fashion based on the evolvement of that particular living entity. This shows that the cause of the variety in the society of human living entities is because of this selection of vibrations by the brain and the further transmission of the same to the gross body of a human living entity and his or her reactions thereof. That is the reason why the monk, the heretic, the sannyasi, the rishi, maharishi, intellectual, professor, lecturer, scientist, researcher, doctor, engineer, worker, electrician, carpenter, goldsmith, blacksmith, employee, employer, etc. Different varieties of people in the society react differently to different circumstances. This is what provides the coloring in this particular society, and it is this coloring that makes this society thrive. Today we shall start talking about one very famous case history which will make us understand the human psyche far better than how we understood it before this case history. The protagonist of this case history is one girl who we will call as Shakila. This Shakila was born in the country of Pakistan in the Indian subcontinent to a very educated and respectable family in probably Sindh. This woman had her own prarabdha karma begin right at the time of her birth. That was the reason why she chose to be born in this particular family. This girl, Shakila, had a very normal childhood. Because her family was educated, she also went through her schooling, graduation, etc., and came out as a good or average student. She was intelligent and she had a flair for journalism, social service, and writing. When this girl was 16, she got married to another quite a decent person and she had a daughter from him. Till now, her own prarabdha karma was working in her life and in her psyche. Everything was normal in the life of this girl called Shakila. However, probably this girl was born with some karma which was quite warped and kinky in nature. This is probably because the slice of prarabdha karma that she chose to be born with had this particular kink. This kink bordered on masochism. Masochism happens to a person who begins enjoying and craving physical and mental abuse, torture, and pain. This girl, who had hitherto had a very normal childhood and adulthood, who was married with a daughter, divorced that decent husband of hers and went ahead to look into this life on her own. This husband relocated with his daughter to in America or United States of America. This girl remained in Pakistan. Now, this girl's free will, which was probably based on her prarabdha karma, began working full bloom. When it did, her own kriyamana karma or karma based on her free will began showing its true colors. This girl went ahead and married a guy who was not only several years her senior but who was actually a sadistic demon in his real nature. He had already been married and divorced several times before he married this girl called Shakila. Because this guy was a demonic in nature and because his own psyche had a streak of sadism in it, you may not believe it, but this guy proceeded to torture this girl physically and mentally for 14 long years. In other words, this girl, Shakila, chose masochism, pain, torture, and abuse through her own kriyamana karma to be worked out in this lifetime. Now, it is slightly confusing as to whether she was working out her past kriyamana karma, past prarabdha karma through her kriyamana karma, or she was generating new kriyamana karma to be worked out in this lifetime is slightly uncertain, but the fact remains that this karma was generated by her own free will and kriyamana karma. Besides this, she had her own three layers of subtle body. They were causal intelligence, astral mind, and etheric senses. But probably the vibrations from the etheric senses were selected by her own brain to be worked out in her psyche in the beginning, as a result of which the touch part of etheric senses was applied full bloom in the psyche of this particular girl called Shakila, as a result of which she continued to enjoy the pain emanating out of the torture of that demonic and sadistic husband for 14 long years. However, slowly but steadily, some sense prevailed and her brain began receiving and processing vibrations from her astral mind and causal intelligence, as a result of which this same tortured and abused woman became a social worker and a writer. She has written several books which have become international bestsellers. One of those books completely described her own demonic, sadistic husband and her own relationship with him which lasted 14 long years. This is one thing which I wanted to discuss with you, but before that, I would also tell you that probably she had a kink in her own false ego, which becomes the fourth factor that decides on the psyche of a particular human living entity. This false ego, where the person or the living entity identifies himself or herself with this gross body of his or her, is known as false ego. This girl probably identified with her body, which is a part of causal intelligence, astral mind, etheric senses, and gross body, as a result of which, because of her ego, she enjoyed this torture and this pain for 14 long years. Now we know how the psyche of this girl shaped us. Yes, there were other factors too, like her upbringing, her atmosphere, surrounding experience, material involvement, etc., which also played a part in making up her psyche. But the fact remains that this girl, who could have lived a decent life in this birth, chose to be seen through or chose to pass through literal physical and mental hell during this lifetime thanks to her own free will and kriyamana karma. This is a very important lesson to all living entities. We sympathize with several people when we see them getting tortured or abused. Yes, it is a very good thing to try to protect the people in the society and to sympathize and empathize with them. But we must also keep it in mind that this is probably because of their own free will, kriyamana karma, and prarabdha karma, which they were born with to be worked out. Probably these guys had done something in the past which resulted in their getting physically or mentally abused to work out that particular karma in their own psyche. We must take a lesson from the life of a person like Shakila. We must make sure that neither our prarabdha karma nor our kriyamana karma should have anything which will make us kinky and which will make our own imagination warped to such an extent that we are born with such a torturous nature, whether sadistic or masochistic. It will pain not only us, but it will also pain those loved and near and dear ones that we are surrounded with. The society is pained by the torture that others undergo, while probably the same people who are being tortured are enjoying that pain. We must make sure that we avoid such a circumstance. The ultimate aim of every human being is to get self realized, liberated from this endless cycle of birth and death, and finally get delivered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This we must always keep in mind. We must make sure that our free will and Kriyamana Karma is better and better after every lifetime. It must improve from materialism to spiritualism as fast as possible. Yes, even if we take only one step at a time towards spiritualism, it will have better results in our life and psyche than it had before when we were born with a power of the karma which was not so good in quality as it will become after our own free will and Kriyamana karma in a particular lifetime. We must make sure that our own karma is such that our prarabdha karma in our future lifetimes is better than what it was in the present or the past births. Self evolvement is one very important subject that we should all pursue to become totally spiritualized, self realized, liberated, and delivered. Kindly let me know what you think of my talk on this particular subject and case history. Please give me your expert opinions, thoughts, ideas, and views so that I may blend everything together for the sake of this society. Before concluding, I would like to remind you that I am also a published author with Amazon Kindle and paperback. I write on spiritualism, fiction, and assorted subjects. Spiritualism happens to be my favorite subject. Till we meet in my next video, it is good morning from TSV Raghavan.